Have you ever heard about the Pareto Principle? If not, you should, because this one simple rule can change how you do a lot of things in your life. The basic idea is that 20% of certain skills or knowledge can allow you to deliver 80% of the results. That means, knowing even just the basics, you can do pretty damn amazing stuff. And today, I would like to show you what I believe are those 20% of skills and knowledge in Blender that will allow you to create amazing game assets. Will they be AAA quality assets? Definitely not. But they will definitely be enough to start creating beautiful games. Especially if you, like me, into low poly retro style vibe. So this is more or less what you'll be seeing when you open Blender. Now, first we have to talk about how to move around. The first thing is to rotate the camera. To do that, you simply hold the middle mouse button. Now, if you would like to move the camera, you hold also Shift. So we hold Shift and then again we use the middle mouse button and we are moving around. You will also need to zoom in and zoom out, and you can do that by using the mouse wheel. Pretty straightforward. Now, at this moment we have in the scene only the cube, the camera and the light. By the way, you can see those objects over here in the top right corner. Everything that you put in the scene is generally over there. Sometimes you may want to focus on one of those objects, especially if you have a lot of them and you get lost in your scene. Or there is one more scenario. Basically, sometimes there is this strange bug or behavior, which I don't really understand. When you zoom a lot into an object, because you want to work on a very detailed area, you see that the zoom stops working as expected. So basically you try to zoom in more and it just stops working. Then you can focus on a specific object and then the camera kind of resets, and then the zoom starts to work again. In order to do that, you simply select an object. So for example, here I select the camera and you see I can press the period key on the numpad and I'm focused on this object. Again, you don't have to select it from the list. You can click on the object with the left mouse button, period key, and you see I focused on that. So you see if I would have a lot of different objects, that would be very, very useful. Now, over here in the top right corner, you see there is a direction indicator. So basically you can see from which direction I'm looking at the object. If I would like to look at the object from the very precise perspective, I can simply click on one of those buttons. So for example, now I'm looking from the top, and if I click once again, I view it from the bottom, and so on, so on. But you can do that also, and this is much quicker. That's how I usually do it. You can use the numpad keys. So you can use 7 for top, 9 for bottom, 1 for left, and 3 for right. If you are working with Blender on your laptop, this is very important. You may not have the numpad. You can use the tilde key, so the key before 1 on the keyboard, and you can select the direction over here. So if you select top, then you are viewing the object from the top. When you go into one of those views, there is one more thing which is happening. Basically, the view changes from the perspective view to orthographic view. That means there is no perspective. The best way to demonstrate it is if we look from this side, and now basically you see there is this button, and this allows you to change from the perspective to orthographic view. This might be very useful if you, for example, would like to work on the isometric stuff. Also, there is the hotkey for that. That's what I usually use, and that's 5 on the numpad. Okay, let's now move to simple transforms. First of all, as we said, if I click on something with the left mouse button, I select it. Now, if I would like to move this object, I can do that using the tools on the left, right? So here we have the move tool, rotate, scale, but honestly, I don't even see during the tutorials or anywhere people using it. It's much easier and much quicker to use the hotkeys. So I usually have this tool selected. You can do that by pressing W. By the way, if you ever see that it stops selecting stuff, maybe you enabled another type of selection, and that's basically when you press W, you just go to the next selection type and you basically until you go back. So for example, now we have the box selection, which is probably the most useful. So again, you do that with the W key. So when we are here and we would like to move this object, what we can do, we can press the G key. Over here, you see I'm moving the object now. Now the object moves perpendicular to the camera. So basically from the direction in which I'm looking, there's like a magical plane invisible, and we are moving the object in this plane. And this is not the most convenient because, you know, it's not very precise. So what you can do instead, when you press the letter G, so if you would like to lock it, for example, to certain axis, so for example, you would like to move it in X, you then press the letter X, and suddenly the object moves in that axis. Of course, it works also for Y, and it also works for Z. Now, if you press the right mouse button, you cancel the movement and it goes back where it was. So I move it here, right mouse button, and it's back where it was. Of course, you can also confirm it with the left mouse button. Now, sometimes instead of moving along certain axis, you want to exclude that axis. So for example, you want to move it in X and Y, but you don't want to move it vertically. So you want to exclude the Z axis. To do that, you press G and then you hold Shift and press the letter Z. That excluded the Z axis. So now it moves in X and Y. If I would like to exclude Y, that would be simple. I just press Shift and press the letter Y. And now you see I'm moving in X and Z. Now, this is how we move the object. Now, if we would like to rotate the object, we can use the letter R. And situation is exactly the same. So there is like a magical ray from the top or like from the middle of the camera that goes through the object, and we rotate the object around that point or around that ray. If you would like to rotate it in a specific axis, you again can use Z, X, and Y keys. So here, nothing unusual. However, when it comes to the rotation, there is kind of another mode of rotating objects. So if you press R, you see I'm going to the regular rotation, but if you press it once again, you see the cursor changed. And now it kind of, the object follows my movement. So if I move my cursor to the left, the object rotates to the left. If I move it to the right, it moves to the right. The same if I move it to the top or I move it to the bottom, it kind of follows basically my movement of the mouse. And of course I can cancel it with the right mouse button. In order to scale the object, I press the letter S and I can scale it up or scale it down. Of course, you have to remember that locking to the axis is not movement specific. You can also lock the scaling and rotation. So if I would like to rotate the object around the Z axis, I simply press R and then Z, and you see I'm rotating it over here. Now, when your object is not aligned perfectly, sometimes you may want to rotate it in the local axis. So here you see this is a global Z-axis. That means that basically, you know, it's always perfectly vertical. But I want now to rotate the object around that object's Z-axis. To do that, I press second time the letter Z. So you see now I rotate it along the local Z-axis, and it of course works for X, and it works for Y exactly the same. So nothing unusual here. All of this stuff is of course very useful also when scaling. So for example, we may want to scale the object horizontally. So in X and Y, we can exclude Z by holding Shift and pressing Z. And then you see I'm modifying its dimensions without modifying its height. So this is very, very useful. You'll be using it a lot. Now, sometimes you want a very precise change in dimensions or in position. So you can type the values. So for example, if I press the letter G, I am now moving the object. If I press the letter X, you see I'm moving it along the X axis, and now I can type, for example, 2. And this will move the object exactly 2 units. Now I can confirm it with left click or the Enter key. So that's what I've done. The same it works for example, scaling. If I would like to make it twice as big, I simply type 2, enter, and here we are. And for rotation, of course, if I would like to rotate it 45 degrees in z-axis, I can do that easily too. Now let's talk about some more basics, which will become very useful in a moment. First, if we would like to select all of the items, we can press the letter A, and you see all of them became selected. If I would like to unselect everything, I can quickly press the letter I twice. For example, here, selection, unselection. Now, deleting items is very simple. We select what we want to delete. So for example, let's say we press A to select everything. We press the letter X. We have this small pop-up, and we can just confirm the deletion, and we deleted all of the objects. Of course, Ctrl Z and Ctrl Shift Z work as everywhere, so no problem with it either. Now, if we would like to add a new object, you simply hold Shift and press the letter A, and we have this nice menu where we can select different types of objects. Let's, for example, select the cylinder. Cylinder is a great example because it allows us to set some extra settings. So over here in the left bottom corner, you see we have this small pop-up at cylinder, and we can modify some values. So for example, at this moment, we have 32 walls around the cylinder, and we can simply change it by changing this value over here. So you see I changed it to 8, and now I have much rougher cylinder. The same with radius, I can set it to something smaller. Whoops, sorry, it should be period, not the comma. Okay, over here. And depth, of course. And you can do that for most of the objects. Of course, all of them have some types of options. Some are more useful, some are less useful. But what's important, once you move the object, you cannot change that anymore. So if you, for example, realize that, oh no, I still have too many walls or too little walls, you have to delete the object and re-add it. Just bear in mind it remembers your last settings. So now if we would like to change it to 12, that's what we can do over here, and we have beautiful cylinder. Now you may be thinking that the objects appear in the middle of the scene, so in the 0, 0, 0 position, but what is actually happening, they are appearing in this position of this strange shape in the middle. You see, this what you see here is a Blender cursor. You can move it around by holding Shift and clicking right mouse button. So you see, we move it to different locations this way. So I can move it, for example, to the top of the cylinder, press Shift A and add another object. I'm going to scale it down, and you see it is there where the cursor was placed before. Now let's delete those and let's add 2 cubes. Let's move them, or maybe first let's reset the cursor to the original position. We can do that by holding Shift and pressing the letter S, and now we have some options basically about moving cursor and stuff to cursor. So over here we select cursor toward origin, and you see it's again in the default position. Now we create 1 cube. Let me move it a little bit to this side, and let me create another cube, and let's move it over here. Now, of course, you can select multiple objects by holding Shift and clicking on the other object. Now, if you rotate them, so having both of them selected, I press the letter R and the Z to lock them in Z axis, you see they are rotating around the median point. So you see there's in the middle this point from which this dashed line is coming, and this is around which point they are rotating. This is because over here we have selected the median point. That's the default position. Those are in general very useful, and you will be using them a lot. Some are more useful. For example, the individual origins, if we select that, and if we do that once again, so if we rotate, if we press R and then Z, you see now we are rotating each object individually around its own origin. We'll talk about the origin points in a second, so don't worry. Another useful one is around the 3D cursor, because you can freely move the 3D cursor. So this is why it's very useful, because for example, we can move the cursor over here, and you see if we rotate the objects now, they rotate around that point. And the last one, which I want to talk about, is the active element. So now you see we have two objects selected, and one of them is slightly brighter, so like a little bit more yellow. Let's create one more object just so it is more visible. So you see we have 3 objects, and one is this highlighted in this lighter color. Now if we have the active element selected, we'll be rotating around this highlighted object. So basically the active element in the scene is the one with the bright orange outline. So you see, as expected, we rotate around this object. Now let me move them back. Let's remove this one, and let's maybe add a sphere. Okay, let's move it a little bit here, make it a little bit bigger. Now I select the cube, and let's just make it again median point. And let's talk a little bit about snapping, because this is another option which you'll be using a lot. Now, when it is selected, when it's disabled, and you have the increment option selected here, when you hold Control, you see it moves nicely on the grid, basically snapping exactly to the Blender units. If we enable snapping, you won't have to hold the Control key. It basically will be always snapping to the grid. But where it gets interesting are those other options. So for example, we have vertices, edges, and faces. So you see each model consists of those individual points. And those points, like kind of corners, are called vertices. So basically the points are vertices. Now between points we have edges. Then we have also faces, and faces are those surfaces over here, so between the edges. Now, why that's important when talking about snapping? Because when we snap, we can select one of those. So for example, we can select the vertices, and now when we grab this object, so when we press G, you see I can snap it to all the vertices. And what's happening, you see, it's the closest vertex, so this one is basically snapping to the vertex I'm pointing at. We can do the same for edges. So you see now I can snap it anywhere to the edge. Maybe I will zoom in a little bit, that will be more visible. You see now I'm not able to put it on the surface, I'm putting it on the edges. And then we have the third option, face. We can place it anywhere on the object. So you see it's not floating around freely, it's just basically always putting that vertex of my object, of my cube, on the surface of the sphere. Now this is not the most useful, I mean the option where the closest vertex is getting snapped. Instead, over here, you can change from the closest to the center. So now, if I grab the cube, you see the middle of the cube is getting snapped to the object. But we can make it even better. If we would like to rotate the cube so it faces exactly the same way as the particular surface, we can over here enable align rotation to target. So we grab the object, and now you see we can snap it nicely to different positions. Just remember to always, when finishing snapping, change it to increment, because otherwise you won't be able to snap the object to the grid while holding Control. Now things are starting to get really exciting. Let's start modifying shapes of different objects. First of all, let's remove everything we have, so A, X, and delete. Let's reset the cursor. Let's add, for now, maybe a sphere, and let's change the number of segments to 16 by 16. It's okay. That will work. You probably noticed that if we press J or R, we are not rotating the individual parts of the mesh, but rather the whole object. If we would like to modify the mesh instead, we have to change the mode. So currently over here you can see we are in the object mode. You can change the mode by clicking over here, right? So you can open the drop-down and select the edit mode, or you can simply press the tab button. When you press the tab button, you automatically go to the edit mode, and then when you press it once again, you go to the object mode. Now, in the edit mode, you can press the number 1 to be able to work with vertices, so the individual points. You can press the number 2, that will go into edge mode, or you can press 3, and that will allow you to work with individual faces. Of course, when working with them, you can do exactly what we did to the object. So you can move it, you can scale it, you can rotate it, everything works exactly the same way. Even the locking around axis. So if I want to lock something in the, for example, the movement, so the letter G and then Y, you see now I'm moving it in the Y axis. There is, however, one nice option when it comes to movement. So for example, if I selected this edge over here, so I pressed 2 and then I clicked on the edge, and then I press G first to enable movement, and then I press it second time, you will see that the edge starts to slide along the edges that are around. So you see I cannot move it freely wherever I want, it's just going along the edges. The same thing with vertice, so I can select specific vertex and then press G and then second time G, and you see I can move it only along the edges. Another very useful tool when it comes to editing the shape, it's proportional editing. So you see over here we have this button which we can press, or we can just press the letter O and that will enable it. So let's say now if I select this one, and let's disable it for a second, you see if I move this vertex, sometimes it might be what you want, but sometimes you may want to modify the whole shape smoothly, but kind of focusing on this one point. When you enable the proportional editing, this is exactly what you'll be doing. So first you see I press the letter O. Now when I press G, you see I'm starting to modify the shape, and the closer it is to that vertex, the more it's affected, the farther it is, it's affected less. And now when you scroll your mouse, you kind of change the influence zone. So you see the larger the circle, the larger area is affected. So if I select only here, you see nothing outside this circle is affected. Also, you have many different options. That's honestly what I use the most because this gives really a nice results. I do quite often also use random option. So if I, for example, create a terrain or something like that, now you see if I move it in Z, you see suddenly I have something that looks a little bit like a mountain. You can experiment with those, but those two are really the ones that I work with most of the time. Let's press Ctrl Z to go back to the initial shape. You can, of course, select multiple vertices by holding Shift, or you can do it with the box select. So of course the box select is over here, it's the one that you select by pressing the W key. What's important again, when you press it once again, it changes the selection mode to the select circle, and this is also very useful because basically when you draw you can select this way very precisely all the things you need, and it's much quicker than selecting them individually. Now here you can modify the radius, so you see it's now much bigger, so it selects more, or it selects much less, it's much smaller circle. Let's go back to the box selection, and now let's say I select those points. Now, when doing that, usually you want to select also what's on the other side, but unfortunately, by default, you select only those that are visible. So if I try to do it again here, you see those are deselected, of course, unless I hold Shift. But this is very annoying and sometimes difficult to work with. What you can do instead is pressing Shift and then pressing the letter Z. That will change the object into the wireframe mode. That means it will become transparent, and now everything that you see will be selected. So even the things that are behind. So you see I selected very easily the whole part, and I can now easily move it. Now let me press Ctrl Z to make to go back to this shape. And now we can also duplicate the part that we have selected. So let's say, for example, we change to the face mode. You see now I have all those faces at the top selected, and let's say I want somewhere to make a roof of this shape. So what I can do is I have them already selected. Now I hold Shift and I press the letter D, and that duplicates this particular faces. Now I can, for example, right click it to cancel the movement. Bear in mind this cancels the movement. They are already created. Now I need to also disable the proportional editing, so I have to cancel it once again, press O to disable the proportional editing, and you see this has been kind of extracted. Now, very important thing, both of them, even though they are separate, they are one object. So if I go back to the object mode, you see I cannot select them individually. They are still treated as one object. So if I would like to separate them, I have to go again to the edit mode, select what I want to be separated. In my case, I'm lucky because it's already selected. By the way, I just double pressed A to deselect everything. In case you want to select kind of sub-object, so all the vertices or all the faces that are connected together, you can just hover over the item, so for example over here, and then press the letter L. And L will select everything that's connected, like it happened here. If I hover over this one and press L, that will also select this one. So now to deselect everything, double A, hover over this one, L, selected just this one. Now, if I would like this one to become a separate object, I have to press the letter P. And now I select by selection, and you see new object appeared in my collection. So now if I go to the object mode, I can, whoops, now I still have the proportional editing in the object mode. And now if I select either one, I can move them separately. Now sometimes you may want to combine the objects. So let's even to those two add maybe a cube, one over here. Let's duplicate it, because what's important, the Shift D works also in the object mode. So now I duplicated the cube. Now let's select all of them. And what's important, you see there is this orange dot in the middle of each of the figures or of the objects, and that's called origin point. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment, but for now, please remember that when joining the objects, as they will become one, they can have only one origin point. And they will basically get the origin of the active element. So in our case, you see the cup and the sphere have the same origin because they were basically, they had one shared origin when we separated them. So now let's focus on the sphere to make sure we have this origin point, and we can hold Ctrl and press the letter J. And now you see all other objects disappeared, and now we have this one object. So when we go to the edit mode, we can work on them all at the same time. One more small tip, sometimes you may want to work on multiple objects in the edit mode, but you want them to stay separate objects. You can without any problem do that. So if I add, for example, cylinder, I move it over here, and now I select both objects and press Tab to go to the edit mode. You see I can manipulate both of them. So I can manipulate this one without any problem, and I can manipulate those ones also without any problem. Now let's remove everything. However, we have to be very careful where we delete items, because you see at this moment we are in the edit mode. So if we select everything and delete it, so X, you already see that the menu looks slightly different, but let's say you didn't pay attention, just pressed faces, you see the object disappeared. But you see those orange points over here are still there. That means that the objects are there. If you look at the list, cylinder and sphere are still there, and you can actually move their origin points to a different place. Usually this doesn't do much damage, but if you will, for example, export it to Unity, you will have some extra objects and you will be wondering, hell, what happened? So it's good to remember about that. What's important in general, you want to pay attention in which mode you are doing things, because, for example, let's press Ctrl Z multiple times to restore our objects. You can also add objects in the edit mode. So, for example, if I add cube now and move it over here, my active object was this big object, and you see this cube became part of it. So now this sometimes is what you want, because you may want to build a complex shape from simple ones, and that's completely fine, and actually that's what you often do. But sometimes you may want them to be separated, and you do that by creating the objects in the object mode. So if I create a cube, now you see it is a separate object. So once again, let's delete everything. And now let's talk about the origin point. So let's start by adding a new cube, and let's move the Blender cursor to the side so it doesn't bother us. And you see in the middle of this object, I have this orange dot, and this orange dot is exactly the origin point. So basically, if I move my object in the object mode, you see this dot is traveling together with the object. All of the transforms that we do on that object are happening around this origin point. So if I, for example, rotate the object, you see the dashed line is going exactly from this origin point. The same for scaling. If I scale it, it is happening around this point. If we move to the edit mode and move the object up, you see if I go back to the object mode and now start scaling it or rotating, everything behaves completely differently. And this is very important, especially if you want to animate the object or you want to use it in the game engines. Because imagine that this is a door. So let's scale it a little bit in this direction, and let's grab this and extend it to the top. And let's say this is our door. If I try to rotate it around the z-axis, this is how it will behave. And this is not what I want. Of course, the first way to fix the origin point, to place it in the right place, is to press Tab to go to the edit mode, and I can move everything, hoping that I will nail the position down correctly. So, okay, something like this will probably do. Then I go out of the edit mode, and now it rotates all right. But as with everything, usually you want to be much more precise. So we can do that by placing the origin on a specific face or edge, etc. So I go back to the edit mode, select this face, and now what I can do, I can hold Shift and press S and select cursor to selected. That will move the cursor to the selected face, to the middle of it. And what's important, you can have selected more items or more faces, and it will basically average the position. So for example, over here, cursor to selected, now it's in the middle. So it's very convenient way of placing the cursor where you want it to be. Now I once again select this face, move the cursor there, and now this is very important. I go back to the object mode, and here I have this menu. I can go to object, set origin, and origin to 3D cursor. And you see, if I move now the cursor to the side, the origin is exactly where the cursor was previously, which is great. And now the rotation works exactly as I would like it to. Just to let you know, of course, you can place the cursor everywhere. You select the item. So for example, here you can press Shift S and cursor to select it, and you see it is now at the vertex position. So you can be really precise with that. But sometimes you don't care about the precise position. Basically, you modeled something and you realize like, oh hell, my origin point is not even within the boundaries of the object. And that's of course, sometimes what you want, but sometimes you may want to move the origin point to be somewhere in the middle. To do that, you can simply go, of course, in the object mode, to the object. I feel I'm saying the word object too many times. Set origin and origin to geometry, and that will place the origin point in the middle of the geometry of the object. And now, probably the most complex, but also the most interesting section. We'll be talking about adding extra geometry. What I mean by that is, let's first start by creating a simple cube. If we would like to make something interesting out of it, it would be pretty difficult to work only with the vertices it has, right? There are not that many, so if we want to manipulate them, move edges around and this type of stuff, we really don't have much we can do. Of course, we can always add a new object in the edit mode and work with that and create something interesting. And yes, this is definitely one of the ways to do that, but there's much more we can do. So let's go to object mode, delete our creation, and let's create another cube. Now, if we go to the edit mode, and if while holding Ctrl we press the letter R, you see this yellow ring will appear, and that's a loop cut. If I scroll now the mouse wheel, I will increase or decrease the number of the loops. This is basically a tool that will create those extra edges on our object. So I can confirm it with the left mouse button, and now I can also slide them around. So I could confirm it here, or I can press right mouse button to cancel it, and that will be in the middle, so like in the default position. And you can of course do it in different directions with different number of cuts. There's no problem with that whatsoever. And already here you see we have many more faces that we can work with, so there's much more stuff we can do, and it will behave completely differently. So this is a very good starting point. Now, when you have loops, you can very conveniently select them. So for example, if I go to the edge selection by pressing 2, and now I want, for example, to select this loop over here, I can hold the Alt key and click on the edge, and that will select the loop. I can of course hold Shift to select multiple loops. So this is very, very useful. Of course, it works also in the face mode. So if I go to face mode, now you have to be careful where you click, because if you, for example, want to select this ring, you have to be close to the edge that is across that surface. So for example, if I would like to select this one, I have to be close to this one, because if I will be here, I will select this loop. So this is very useful. So for example, now you know we can all scale it, and we kind of accidentally created a old school DV. When doing loop cuts, there is one interesting thing. So for example, if you create a double loop cut over here, and you would like them to be like kind of farther away from each other, you can cancel the movement. Now they are in the middle, and what you can do, you can use the scale tool. What's important, you have to have the median point selected, because it has to be scaling around the middle point. So now if I press S and Y, you see if I scale it, they basically move closer or farther away from each other. So I can do now something like that. And now I have some extra interesting edges that I can work with. Sometimes you may want there to be an edge between two vertices. You can select them and press the letter J. And this will basically create edge that will cut this surface over here. And what's important, you can do that even across multiple faces. So if I select this and press the letter J, you see I created extra edges all over here. Now, very important, you have to be careful, because there's also creating edge with letter F. But if you do that, you create like a free edge, so something that will connect to vertices, but it will not be part of the face. So this can be easily, you see over here, we have this edge, but it's already kind of like in the middle of the face. So it's not part of it. It didn't break it in half. So we can Control Z. And now if I press J, you see it broke it nicely and in half. And we have two separate parts that we can work with. And now let's talk about real beasts that allow you to create a lot of crazy stuff. Let's start by deleting our object, and let's add a new cube. Now I go to the edit mode, and you see if I, let's say, cut this face in half and this face in half, I do have some nice extra geometry that I can work with. Let's even add one extra over here. If I select a face now and press the letter E, I will be able to extrude it. So you see this creates this nice extra geometry over here. What's important, if we break it down further, we can also extrude inside. So you see over here, and then suddenly we have kind of a building with a chimney. So this is very powerful stuff. Now, you may expect the extrusion to work correctly on the edges, but unfortunately, if you try to press now the letter E, you see you will have some faces in the way. There is a way, but we have to do it slightly differently. So let's press Ctrl Z. And now, instead of pressing E, let's hold the Alt key and press the letter E. And now we have this little menu where we can select multiple ways of extruding. And let's select Extrude Manifold. And if I now extrude down, you see this behaves as we intended it to. And this is very useful when you have to work around the edges. So for example, again, if I do something here, I select this face, again, regular extrusion will without any problem allow me to go up. But if I want to go down, we have to extrude it manifold. Awesome. Now what's important, if you have multiple faces selected and you start extruding, they will extrude as one. So if I select this one now, you see this geometry is all connected. But sometimes you may want them to be individual. So in order to do that, let's press Ctrl Z. We have selected those three. Let's once again press Alt E. Now you see we have here option extrude individual faces. And now if we extrude them, even though on the surface it looks the same, they are all separate objects. So if we now scale them in X, you see they are actually separated. So again, if I wanted to do that before, I couldn't, now I can. I can rotate it and so on, so on. So now I have individual shapes I can work with. There is another one which is very interesting. So let's now select all of those faces. First of all, you see all of the faces haven't selected, and that's because now we don't have such a clean geometry as we had before. So before, for example, if I cut it now here, you see every single face has 4 vertices. They are all exactly the same in terms of number of vertices. So if I try to loop select them, I can do that without any problem. Over here, it's not so straightforward anymore, because you see those faces have 4 vertices, but for example this one has already 5 because we introduced a new one over here. So now the loop selection will not work, unfortunately. So I select those. For our purpose, that will be enough. Let's say now I want to extrude them, and of course we would assume that they will create a nice overhang, but unfortunately if I press E, they will behave very strangely. Basically what is happening, I think Blender is averaging their positions and just moving them in that direction. So what you have to do instead, let's do Ctrl Z. You have to press again Alt E and select Extrude Faces along normals. And now you see what we expected happened. But unfortunately, because of how our shapes are built now, you see the extrusion is not exactly the same everywhere. So what we can do now here, after we finish the operation, you see we have this small pop-up over here. We can select the checkbox Offset Even, and everything will be fixed. Let's now talk about a tool that works great with extrusion. First, let's add a simple cylinder let's go to the edit mode, maybe scale it in Z a little bit. If I select this face and press the letter I, you see it shrinks, but it shrinks a smart way by adding extra edges over here. So you see we have now very interesting shape. We can scale it and everything, it works beautifully. The inset works with different shapes of the faces, so if we have here a very simple face, it will work without any problem. Now, why I say it works great with extrusions? Because if we, for example, grab this face now and extrude it inward, you see we suddenly have some type of barrel of container. So we could even go lower, and now we have something like a very narrow cup. But let's move it back here. With all the tools we already learned, you see if I add, for example, 2 loop cuts over here and scale them up, this really starts looking like a barrel. So you see, you can really do quite a lot of powerful stuff with those things. Now, when it comes to insetting, there is one very common problem. Let me delete that and let me create a simple cube and scale it maybe in Y. If I go now to the edit mode and try to inset this face, you see it will not inset so nicely, so evenly as before. What happened is when you scale an object in the object mode, let's press the letter N, that will show us this small pop-up over here. You see my scale now is 1, 2.5, and 1. The dimensions also indicate that, but what's important is the scale. Basically, this scale affects everything that we do on our object. In order to fix that, it's very easy. We can press Ctrl A and select Apply Scale. Now you see the dimensions stayed the same, so it's all good, but the scale became uniform. So we have 1, 1, and 1. If I go to the edit mode now and press the letter I, beautiful. You see everything is offset as expected. Now, what's important, there are some extra options over here, and the one that we can have a look now is the individual, and it works exactly the same as with extruding. So if I select those faces and inset them, you see they inset as one. But if we select this individual option, they basically become individual ones. We can extrude it, and suddenly we have, again, maybe some kind of brick or a shelf if we rotate it this way, for example, like that, right? Sometimes, for some reason, you will want to delete a face. So, for example, if I select this face and press the letter X, you see I have those options. So, for example, if I delete now faces, you see this one is gone. But be very careful when deleting faces, because it can lead to some strange behaviors or artifacts. So, for example, each face has a direction, right? It's kind of obvious, but each one of them is pointing in a certain direction. If we enable the face orientation view, we'll notice something strange. If we look from this side, you see those faces are red. Logically, it seems that each face have two directions, but this is not the case. Each face can have only one direction it's pointing towards, only one so-called normal. And the red color indicates that what we are looking at is the back of the face. So this will render differently depending on the tool you are using. So for example, in Unity, they may become completely transparent, for example. Over here we see them, but they are red. If we disable the face orientation, they will be seen as normal, but this is very dangerous. So it is really very good practice to keep the face orientation enabled, so you can always spot this type of errors or problems. You never want to have some wrongly facing faces in your model, because it can really affect how the model will be displaying. So now if we want to recreate face, we can select the edges we want to connect. We don't have to select all of them. Sometimes you will have to select more, sometimes less, depending on how complex the shape is. But here is very simple, and you can press the letter F. And as you see, this created a face, which works very well. Sometimes on a different occasions, or sometimes depending on how the edges are placed and so on, the face may be created facing the wrong way. So for example, if we go over here to mesh and go to normals, we can flip the normal of the face. So now if we zoom inside the object, we can see that this object, or rather this face, is facing inward, and this is not what we want, right? We see that this is a wrong direction, and this might sometimes happen after extrusion and or insetting. You may realize that you moved your mouse the wrong direction or something like that. So keep in mind that you always want to fix this type of errors. So again, in order to flip the normal, you just select the face, go to mesh, normals, and flip. If you have a lot of faces like that, so for example, let me quickly flip some of them, you can select the whole object, and what you can do is go to mesh, normals, and recalculate outside, and that will basically try to rotate all the faces the correct way. Now we have some more interesting tools. Let me just delete this object. Let's create another cube, and let's make very quickly some kind of column. So let's say we want to scale this one, maybe move this one here, insert this face, and extrude it up, and then extrude it once again, and scale it. And we have very simple obelisk or something. And it would be interesting to put a symbol on it, right? You can do that using a knife tool. So for example, over here, we can press the letter K, and now we can start drawing a, for example, runic shape or something, let's say, something like that. And when I closed it, now I have to confirm it by pressing the enter. You see it added some edges to support the shape, and that's very good. We can add some ourselves by, for example, using again the knife tool over here, you see, and we can select this face, right? And what we can do, we can extrude it inside. Suddenly we have this interesting runic shape over here. Now, when you work with complex shapes, it's sometimes difficult to see what's going on. Like here, you see the shading is a little bit difficult. What you can do to help with that, you can go over here and select the wireframe. And this will always show the edges regardless of in which mode you are. So you see now I'm in object mode and I see the edges, and this makes it very, very clear. Some people don't like it. Honestly, I don't work with it often too. You can also, of course, decrease the opacity so it's not so invasive. But what I do, I usually go over here and I enable the cavity. I change it to buff. This gives us already some extra nice view. And I also like to enable shadows, sometimes maybe decrease it a little bit. And now you see it's much clearer what is happening. So when you use some of the tools, let's say, for example, I press the letter K to use the knife, you see at the very bottom you have a lot of options. We won't be touching upon those ones, but it's worth knowing that the options are always visible there for you, and you may want to experiment with them. So for example, you know, if I cut a shape and I want to lock it on certain axes, you see there is the letter X, Y, and Z mentioned at the very bottom, and I can do that, and it will definitely be helpful. Now, the next tool I want to show you is the Bisect tool. So if we have a simple cube over here, let's move it up. Let me actually move this wall a little bit up. And now, in order to use the Bisect tool, you have to go to the side and locate the knife tool. If you hold the left mouse key longer, you see you will have this pop-up and you will be able to select Bisect. Now, Bisect works on the faces that are selected, and this is very important. So I have to select everything, and bisection is basically slicing through the object. So you see I sliced over here. Now, it looks like nothing happened, and that's because it basically separated those two objects. But what we can do now is we can clear the outer part. So you see it got rid of one of the sides. Of course, depending on which one you want to keep, you can select the other. And we want to enable fill. And this makes also the face to appear there. Now we can use the bisection multiple times. So for example, again, And you see that what's happening when you don't select everything. So it bisected this selected face and broke completely the geometry. So I have to Control Z, select everything. Again, for some reason, it doesn't store the options, which I believe is a bug maybe in this version I'm using, because usually it worked as expected. So now we do that. And suddenly you see we start getting this feeling of a chipped stone. So this is how I, for example, create rocks. This is very, very good technique for that. It's very quick. It really allows you to do a lot of interesting shapes very, very quickly. So for example, over here, and you see if we rotate it now, we really have a very interesting rock. Now our origin is not in the nice place. So we could, for example, grab this one, cursor to selected, object mode, and once again, object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor, and we have it at the very bottom. Now we can even rotate it a little bit, and you see we have some type of rock. So bisection is really, really useful tool as well. Now let's look at our bisected object, and now we may want to add some curved edges on it. So for example, this one. If we want to bevel it, we can hold the Control key and press the letter B. And now you see if I move my mouse away, I'm creating this type of facet. And at this moment, you see it created only one face. But what you can do is you can select the edge. You can do the bevel by pressing Control B. And now if you scroll your mouse wheel, you see you create this extra geometry. So you create those extra faces like over here, and suddenly it's much smoother, much more interesting. Now you can also bevel the vertices. So if I grab, let me look for a sharp vertex. That would be, I think this model will be better for that. So if I grab this vertex over here and press Ctrl B, you see nothing will happen, because this is the edge bevel mode. If I want to bevel the vertex, I have to hold Ctrl Shift and then press B. And now you see it bevels nicely, and you can control how many faces you want using your mouse wheel. And we have very interesting shape. Now you see it has a problem with rendering. So now what we can do, we can grab those two vertices and press the letter J, and suddenly we have nice chipped corner on our column. And the last tool I want to show you is the spin tool. It's very important and very useful when you want to create, for example, pipes, because you know there are those parts that bend, and in general it's not so easy to create those. So let me show you how I would do it. So over here I have a cylinder. Let's move it up a little bit, and now I need to place a cursor in a specific place. Why is that? It's because the spin tool works around not a position or not around the vertex, it works around the 3D cursor. So for example, I can select this vertex over here, Shift S, cursor to selected. Now I go to the face mode, grab this face, and you see over here on the left, I have the spin tool. Now this interesting arc appeared over here, and let's change it in which direction we want the spin to work. You see, you have those three options. Let's go with X, and now look what will happen. I start rotating it, and of course you can hold Control to snap it. So for example, over here, I would like to have a 90 degree, and you see I created this beautiful arc or like pipe bend. Here you can modify the step number. So for example, if I want it to be less detailed, I can simply change it to something like 4, and it will work great too. Now I can go back to regular editing, for example, by pressing W to be in the select mode, or rather use the select tool. And now I can press E to extrude, and you see I have this nice pipe bend. Now, there is something called smoothing, which is very interesting. So for example, here you see we have a lot of very hard edges, even though it's pipe. We can try to smooth them out by clicking the right mouse button and selecting Autosmooth. You see, if we go now to the modifiers tab, over here on the object, we see the smooth by angle was added. And now it's smoothing everything below the 30 degrees. So now, in this case, you see it's not enough of the geometry. So we could try to increase it, but we have to be very careful with that because it can start behaving a little bit strange. You see over here we have kind of nice round shape, but here it's still too sharp in order to be smoothed. But this is something that you can always experiment with. You see it can add like it can completely change how something looks like. It's especially visible on stuff like, for example, spheres. So here I have a sphere. If I auto smooth it, you see it's completely different type of sphere. The lines you see are because we have enabled the cavity. So if I disable cavities, you see this looks completely different. Now let me give you two small tips. Basically, when you duplicate something, right, we said that you can use Shift-D to duplicate it. So if we do that, but now go to edit mode and modify the shape, we'll create a completely new structure. So right, this first one isn't affected at all by our changes, but sometimes you want to have something like prefabs in Unity. So you basically want to have multiple objects that are instances of one object. And you can do that in Blender without any problem by duplicating the object with Alt-D instead of Shift-D. So now you see I have this column, and if I go to edit mode and start modifying it, you see the original one is also modified. And this is great. Another tip is that sometimes you want to kind of connect the object. So you would like this one in the middle to be replaced by this one over here, right? In order to do that, you can simply select both objects. Now you have to be careful which one is deactive. So we want to replace the middle one with this one on the right. So this one on the right has to be active. Now we press Ctrl L and we have those many options to link the objects together. The one that I'm talking now at this moment is link object data, and this literally replaces this one with the copy of this. And again, it will all behave exactly the same as with the first one. And now let's talk a little bit about modifiers. And after that, we'll have a look at some assets examples. So first, let me remove everything. Let me move the cursor to the word position, or rather word origin, and let me create a cube. And let's say we want to create a simple warehouse shelf. Let's move to the edit mode. Now let's scale it a little bit, move it, maybe scale it this way. And now let's add two loop cuts, one this way and one this way. Now I'm pressing 3 to go into face selection mode, then I press Shift Z to go into wireframe mode. I select the faces because I want to delete them. You'll see why in a second. Now when they are selected, I press X and I select faces. Now this is one small thing which I didn't tell you before, but it's very important that you are very careful with what you delete, because at this moment you see we have those edges selected, right? And they are part of those faces. So for example, if we delete edges, we'll delete part of the other face. So if I would do that now, you see we broke the geometry. So we have to be very careful. In this case, we don't want to delete those edges. We don't want to delete those vertices. We want to delete faces. Now, when we have an object selected, and we can go to the modifiers tab. That's where we see the auto smoothing thing. We can click on the add modifier and we can add some stuff ourselves. But before we add anything, let's talk a little bit about what modifiers are. They are basically a special functions or special tools which make the modeling much easier. They basically do a lot of stuff automatically for us, and generally that means that we don't have to repeat certain steps many times. So for example, the first one I want to show you is the mirror modifier. So over here we start typing mirror and we click on this one. Suddenly you see a second part of the mesh appeared. So basically copy of this one appeared over here. That's because we have a mirror across x-axis. We can do that also on the y-axis, and now you see 4 parts appeared. Now if I exit the wireframe mode, you see I cannot modify those parts. I can modify only the original part that was left, and the other one of course are mirroring it. Now what's important, when you mirror the object, it's not across a geometry, it's across the origin point. So that means if this part wouldn't touch the origin point, you see the mirroring would be very, very strange. Now the second thing is, you see I am able, even though those parts are touching each other, I am able to separate those parts, and this is what you sometimes want, and we'll be using that when creating legs for our shelf. But here we would like those parts to be connected, so to do that we can enable clipping, and now if I try to move the shelf top, you see I'm not able to do that. Now in order to create a leg for our shelf, I can simply press Shift A and add a cube. And now because the clipping is enabled, you see I'm not able to move it to the place where I want it to be. So I simply disable clipping for a moment, move it over here, scale it, and maybe let's change the view to bottom. We can place it over here and then a little bit up, something like that. Or maybe even let's move to the right view and let's move it so it's staying on the ground. So we didn't have to do it 4 times. We just created one leg and everything works beautifully. Now, of course, our shelf should have multiple levels, and for that we can use another modifier, the array modifier. We can add it by going to add modifier and searching for array. We select it and suddenly the other one appeared. This one is geometry based, so if we, for example, move this one, you see it will shrink it. So let's say we want to have 3 levels. We do that by changing the count, and then we change the factor from x to z and make it 1. That means they appear vertically. Of course, they can have any values. So for example, you can modify this one and suddenly you see this happens. So for example, you could create some kind of stairs or anything like that. Now let me change the factor to 0. And you see we have this multi-level shelf. When you work with modifiers, it's important to remember that if you try to export this model, you'll probably see only the part that's actual mesh. So everything that's over here won't be visible in the game engine. So in order to fix that, you can duplicate the mesh, and when you are in the object mode, and this is very important because if you are in edit mode, you see some options are over here disabled. So when you are in the object mode, you apply the modifiers. So now you see everything is just a regular mesh, and you can modify anything any way you want. You may ask why I created a copy, and that's because it's always good to have a working copy of the object with modifiers. Because, for example, let's say now we want to create another shelf with just 2 levels. So instead of recreating it, we can just modify this one, and then, for example, change a little bit the shape. So I can do that. Whoops, I need to enable clipping. And here, and you see everything looks beautiful. I can duplicate it, and again I could just apply in the object mode the modifiers, and we have two variants of our shelves. And let me show you two more modifiers. So first, let's create a mesh, for example, cube. Let's go to the edit mode. And when we select everything, what we can do, we can change to the vertex mode and press M. And that will allow us to merge some vertices together. So for example, you could grab just this one and this one, press M and do it center, and you see that combined those two together. But we want to convert all of them into one simple vertex. So what we do, we select everything, press M, add center, and we now have a very simple single vertex. Now we can also extrude it the same way we extruded the faces. So let's say we want to move to the right view. So we can start by doing something like that, for example. And now we can go to add modifier and add a skin modifier. And suddenly you see the simple edges were converted into meshes. Now they are all having exactly the same width, and we can very easily adjust it. So we can select, for example, all of them, and we can press Ctrl A. And now if you move your mouse away, it will become wider, or it will shrink if you move the mouse closer. Now, what we can do also, we can press Ctrl Z to see our edges. We can select only the top vertex, and we can enable the proportional editing. And now in the smooth mode, if we do Ctrl A and increase the effect area, we can create something like that. And we have very interesting shape, which could, for example, be a base of a tree. Another modifier which works similar way is a Solidify modifier. So let's say we have this cube, I add extra loop over here, and whoops, let me disable the proportional editing, I move this one up, and I have this simple house-like shape. Let's say I would like to make a roof now. What I can do is I can select those two faces, Shift D to duplicate them. Now, if I want to separate them to separate object, I press P and select selection. Now I have this roof object over here. And now what I can do is I can add modifier, which is the Solidify modifier. And now I can set a thickness, and you see I suddenly have something, unfortunately it's inside the house. So let's actually just scale it a little bit, and you see we have a beautiful roof in our house. I think we went through everything that you need to start creating amazing models. Let's now put all of that knowledge into practice by creating some simple models. And in the next tutorial, we'll learn how to texture them. Let's start by creating some modular walls. So I'm deleting everything, adding a new cube. I go into edit mode, move it up a little bit, and now this cube has dimensions 2 by 2 by 2. So I would like the wall to be around 2.5 units high. So I'm selecting this face and moving it up half unit. Now I select everything, scale it like that, and this will be my wall base. So I'm duplicating it and moving that to the side. Now I'm grabbing this one, going to edit mode, adding two loop cuts. Now I will be making the door frame. So I scale this in the Y axis, maybe like that, add another loop cut over here. Yep, that looks all right. And I delete this face, and this face. Now I select those two edges, press F to create a face, now this one, and just press F twice. Nice. I have a door frame. Now let's create a door. So first I want to re-enable the face orientation view. Okay. Now I select those two edges, press F to create a face, and press P to separate it into separate object. Now I focus on that object. Yeah, so I move it over here, I extrude it, and I see the faces are in the wrong direction. So I select all of them, go to Mesh, Normals, Recalculate outside, and everything is fixed. Now there's a small tip. You can press a slash button to focus on the object and at the same time hide everything else. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm going to add a loop cut over here, go to the wireframe mode, change into faces, and select half of them and delete them. Now I'm going to add the mirror modifier. Awesome. And now I'm going back into the regular view. So I press slash once again. Now in the edit mode, I'm going to add a cube. I scale it down, move it a little bit in the X, Z, Y, maybe down a little bit. I scale it down even more. I make sure it's against the door or within the door. Now I extrude this one, maybe scale it down a little bit. On the other side I have exactly the same handle, and I see it's a little too big to my liking. So I select it all by pressing L, I scale it down a little bit, maybe move it here, now here. I'm going to make it a little bit longer. Now move it a little bit more to that side. And now I'm going to add another cube, scale it down, whoop, move it over here, scale it even further, move it here, like that, over here, maybe scale it even more, now scale it in Z, and let's enable shadows and cavities, and we have amazing door. Awesome. So let's put those on the side, or maybe one more thing to do, which is setting the origin to the right place. So I'm going to move it here, or maybe let's leave it where it is. Go into this view, select this edge, Shift S, cursor to selected, tab to go into object mode, object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor. Awesome. And now if we go back by pressing slash, we'll be seeing everything. And if I try to rotate the door, you see the door rotates as expected. Great. So now let's duplicate the wall once again. Let's now create a window. So I go into edit mode, add two loop cuts over here, scale them this way, then add two loop cuts over here, scale them this way, then I select this loop cut with Alt, enable snapping to the edge, and then I move it vertically. So basically what I do, I press G to move it, then Z to lock it in the Z axis, and then you see I kind of touch with my cursor this edge, so I know they are exactly at the same height. Awesome. So I disable now the snapping, I delete this face, I delete this face, select those two edges, press F, then I select this one, F, F, and F. Awesome. Now I'm going to grab all of those ones, press Shift D to duplicate them. I scale them in X-axis, like that, and then I'm going to extrude them along normals. Something like that. Then I'm going to add a loop cut at the top, loop cut at the bottom, select both of them and press Ctrl B to bevel them. So this will create something like that. Then I delete this one, X faces. I select this face and this face, whoops, not this one, press F. Now select this one, and this one, press F, and I think the rest will work as expected. Exactly. Awesome. And that looks decent. What we can do, let's select this part, whoops. And then if you press H, it will hide. So what I can do now, I can go to the wireframe mode, select this part and move it up a little bit, just a little bit. Then I go out of the wireframe mode, press Alt H to unhide everything. I grab this face and duplicate it once again. Then, is it separated? Yes, it is. So then I just extrude it. Then I grab those two, extrude them along normals. And I think that's even nicer. Awesome. So we have nice modern modular elements, which we can then use to make to mash them up and create different types of buildings. So I think for this type of building, there is one more thing which we may want to have. So let me just set the cursor toward origin, so it's at the 0, position. Add another cube. Let's move it over here, then scale it, or maybe in the edit mode, let's move it up a little bit, so the origin point is at the bottom. And now scale it in X and Y, something like that. And then we can grab the top, snap to edge, GZ, and we have this type of kind of wall separator or column. We can use it in different contexts, but it will actually look pretty nice. So we can, for example, put it here, and you see it gives a little bit of extra detail. So let's put that on the side, so we just know that it's a separated element. Okay, now to make the cavities even more visible, I'm going to change the type from screen to both. Yep, that looks better. Then I'm going to select everything. Whoops, I'm in edit mode, so I need to change to object mode, and I'm going to move it back a little bit so we can start working on the next model. And the next model will be a wizard tower. So let's start with a cylinder. That's a very detailed cylinder. Let's change that to 16. Yep, that will do it. Now I go into edit mode, move it up, so the origin is at the base. I grab this one, move it down a little bit, maybe a bit higher, like that. Then I press E to inset the face, and then I extrude it up. Then I extrude it once again, and I'm going to select those ones with Alt, and I'm going to use the extrude along normals to create a overhang. Nice. Now I'm going to select this face. I'm going to just scale it down and move it up. Now we need to create a roof, so I'm going to select all of those. I'm going to duplicate them. Then I move them up a little bit. Press P to separate it by selection. To that object, I'm going to add the Solidify modifier, which adds thickness to simple flat faces. And then I'm going to add a little bit of thickness. I would like the thickness to go other way around. So what I can do for that, I can select everything and I can go to Mesh, Normals, Flip. And now you see the thickness will go the other way around. Now I can scale it up a little bit and move it down. And this looks pretty nice. Let me just add a little bit of detail over here. So I'm going to add 2 loop cuts here. Maybe, add a little bit of that kind of cartoony style. We can maybe rotate it to break the shape a little bit, move it. Does it look better? No, I think it was better when it was straight. And scale down. Yeah, it actually looks pretty nice. Now we need a window. So for window, in the edit mode, I'm going to add a cube. I'm going to move it over here, up. Then I'm going to grab the top face, or rather those 2 edges, that will be better, and bevel them. Or maybe before I do that, let me just scale the cube. So let's make it the kind of window size already. So that will be a little bit better. So maybe something like that. Then we move this face up, grab those 2 edges, Control B to bevel them, add a little bit of roundness to that, maybe that much. The window is still too big, so I scale it down, move it up, then I grab this front face, press E to inset it, and then extrude it inside a little bit. And I think this looks pretty nice. If we like, we may want to also rotate it a little bit like that. And that will be even nicer. So, well, something like that. And we could just duplicate that, rotate 180. Of course, we could do that using the mirror modifier as well. But here, for simplicity, I'm just going to place the other one here. And we have windows on both sides. Nice. Now maybe an entrance. So let's do the entrance from the front, so where we have the window. So I'm going to select those 2, delete them. Now delete also those 2. Now this will be a little bit tougher. So we have to think about a smart way to do that. So we can, the simplest way is to grab the knife tool and add this extra geometry over here. Let's rotate. Over here, we're going to fix the rest in a second. So over here, then we need maybe a face here, edge here. Then we move that, grab those 2 faces and delete them. And now we can grab this one, connect those, and that will do. Now we can duplicate our window, move it down, scale it in Z and in Y. Rotate it a little bit like that. Actually, we can enable snapping, so it's exactly like that. And then we can move it a little bit here. And if we would like it to be a little bit larger, we can scale it this way. And we have a nice entrance. If we would like to make, for example, this more like a wooden surface. Let me just rotate it a little bit because I don't like that it's so tilted. Okay, like that. Yeah, for now it will do. So we could, you know, spend some time to align it properly. But what we can do with this face, we can, okay, it doesn't want to add me loop cuts. So what I can do, I can go to the edge selection. I see I have 1, 2, 3, 4 vertices here. So I can, in the edge mode, select loop cuts over here to create those loop cuts, to create those vertices over here, right? And this way I can now grab this, press J, press J, press J, and press J. And we have, well, let me disable snapping. And now what we can do, we can select all of them. We can extrude individual a little bit, and we can scale them in again. Now we need to change here into individual origins and scale that in Y. And we have wooden door. Now would be good to have a handle. So let me add this small sphere, change subdivisions to be less detailed, move it, scale it down even more. And we have a simple handle. And we have our wizard tower. Let's now also connect the roof to the rest. So you see I select them both. I make sure that the active object is the tower, and I press Ctrl J. You see it lost the modifier, so I have to Ctrl Z and first apply the modifier on the roof. And now I can combine them and everything will work as expected. Now let me move it back. While we are in the fantasy themed stuff now, let's create something very quick, maybe some modular palisades. So again, I'm going to use the cylinder. I'm going to change that to even less detailed, like 8. Move it up in the edit mode, scale it to be something like that. Maybe even more. Depending on the height, we may want actually to make it even higher. And then it can actually be a little bit wider, something like that, yes. Now, I'm going to inset this a little bit to make like a thick bark. And then I'm going to scale this one and just make it smaller by scaling it. And that will do it. Now I need to add a little bit of loop cuts here, scale it down to add a little bit of interesting shape. You can also rotate it a little bit. That will also make it more interesting. Then sometimes you may have a feeling that something looks strange, but that's often the cavity. If you don't work on complex shapes, you can disable that and it will actually look a little bit more like it will be looking in game. So sometimes, you know, you have to be careful with those. You see suddenly here we don't see any details on the window in the wizard tower, so we needed that there, but here we don't need that much. So we can duplicate that, rotate it a little bit. Oops, I actually wanted to do that in the edit mode. So I want to select everything. I want to scale it down a little bit, rotate it, move it down. We can actually make it select here and go cursor to select it, and then we can change the transform pivot point to cursor 3D. Then I will be able to easier manipulate it to something like that. Then we can again move it, rotate it again. Whoops, now again would be good to move the cursor. So now I can select all of it, again rotate it a little bit, maybe the other way around, scale it, rotate over here, and you see it starts looking a little bit more interesting now. We don't want them to be in all the same height, so we can actually scale them a little bit, move them, rotate them. That will add a little bit of variety. Then we can, whoops, again in the edit mode, duplicate it, move it here, then maybe just rotate it a little bit. That looks nice. Then what we can do, we can add a cube, move it here. Actually now we can use the median point already, scale it, move it up over here. Here's middle, so we can now scale it. Whoa. Like that. Make sure all of them touch it. That's okay. Then duplicate it and move it down over here. Nice. And now we have a modular palisade. You see, we can copy it, we can connect, and that will look nice in the game. So let's delete this one. What we can do actually to make it even more interesting is to select all of those, duplicate them, move them here. We can rotate them 180, so they are the other way around. I see that I duplicated also the bar, so let me select it and delete it. Then grab those, scale them down a lot, move them here, here, and make something like spikes. Though I don't think they benefit much from the bark, so let's instead of that, let's remove those ones. So Ctrl Z. And now let's just add another cylinder. Let's move it here, scale it, move it up, and then inset that, make it very spiky, something like that. Then we can rotate it this way, scale it down a little bit, and suddenly our palisade is much more dangerous. So we can do that, we can duplicate it, move it, create quite a lot of them in different locations. Okay, nice. Or instead, let's just make it simply rotating it a little bit one by one. So we can also scale it, but then we need to adjust the position a little bit. This one as well, maybe here, here. Like it. Nice. We can actually now, I think, add the bar. That will add a little bit of something interesting. Maybe rotate it a little bit in X. Yeah, and maybe even duplicate it and place it here. Yeah, I think that will do it. And now we can, you see, if we duplicate it, we can rotate that, so we have like a really modular thing that we can even put around a village or something. And now we can have our wizard tower behind it, scale it up a lot probably. And we can start creating something very interesting. So let me just move this one back, remove the duplicated one, and let's move this one here. And now to have also a little bit of like militaristic theme, let's create a grenade. So again, I put the cursor on the word origin, and this time I'm going to start from the sphere, but this one is too detailed, so I'm going to decrease the number of segments, probably even to 8. maybe 12, let me see. No, 8 will be enough, and here let's also make 8. That will do it. Then I go into the edit mode, scale it a little bit, and now I select some loops, so this one, this one, this one, and this one. And I'm going to extrude individual faces. Nice. That will do it. So now I select the individual origins, and I scale it down, and you see that already starts looking a lot like a grenade. Now I'm going to add a cylinder. It already has only 8 faces, so that's completely fine. I'm going to move it up, then I'm going to make it smaller, something like that. Then I'm going to scale it this way. Now move it down a little bit, maybe even more. Yep, that will work. Now I'm going to add a loop cut over here. Then I'm going to grab those 2 faces. Again, I could cut it in half and use the mirror modifier, but I'm not going to do that. It doesn't add me much work. I can work on both of them at the same time, so it's not a problem. So I do that. Now I add another one over here. Then I extrude down, move it a little bit in the Y, extrude it again, and extrude it again, maybe scale it down a little bit and move it in Y. And we have our grenade almost ready. Now let's maybe, just so it is a little bit more interesting, select from here to here. You can, by the way, select multiple ones by selecting one, and then when you hold Control, you can click on the face, and then it will select like the shortest path to this one. So let's select those. Now let's extrude along normals, like that. Then maybe again to add a little bit of interesting shape, I'm going to grab this edge until this, and then move it down a little bit. Now we need this little thing that you take out so the grenade can blow up. So now let's do that. I'm going to start by adding the cylinder. Move it here. I remove the top face and the bottom face. Whoops, I grab this one using L, scale it down. And now I'm going to add the Solidify modifier. Now I'm going to add some thickness. Now I'm afraid I'm adding it to the whole object, and this is not what I want because the grenade doesn't need Solidify modifier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this part, separate it by selection, and then on the grenade I'm going to remove the Solidify. So now here I grab once again this one, scale it down, rotate it the way I will want it to be on the model. So something like that over here, maybe. Yeah. Over here. We need to rotate it a little bit more, something like that. Will probably work. Nice. Now we can apply the modifier. So to do that, I need to be in the object mode. Great. I select both of them and press Ctrl J. And now add another cylinder. Whoops, I should do it in the edit mode. I add the cylinder, scale it down, rotate it this way, 90 degrees. Scale it like that. And move it over here. Maybe now scale it up a little bit. Well, like that. And maybe move this one over here. And we have our grenade. So this one was, even though it's very interesting, it's pretty simple. Nice. And that's all I have prepared for you today. I hope you found this interesting, and I would really appreciate if you could leave a like and comment under this video, because it took me really long time to create it. And I don't really want to mention how many times I said wrongly vertices or vertex, and how many times I said the word object. In the next tutorial, we'll texture the assets we created and maybe some more. Have a fantastic day, I love you and bye bye.